Welcome to Gamer Retail Ramblings, episode number 33. I'm your host, Travis Severance, today with my special guest, topic expert, Matt Hughes, coming to you live from Millennium Game Studios in Rochester, New York today. A lot of the schools canceled because of how cold it was last night. We're going to talk about Gundam today. There's a lot of conversation that's been happening in retail channels recently about Gundam. Bandai did two big product announcements for Gundam and the Gundam license recently, and we've been carrying Gundam for quite a while at this point. So we're going to get into everything Gundam that we've dealt with as far as retailing Gundam, some of the things that we expect to see from the TCG, as well as the upcoming miniatures game. I want to talk about really briefly next week. I'm going to do a show all about distribution. One of the bigger distributors in the industry was part of a Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing, Alliance Distribution. There's a whole bunch of rippling and different things and all kinds of conversations that sort of happen for their distribution. Is not a topic that I've ever got myself into before on the show. So I feel like it deserves at least a half hour. I can go through sort of my experience with distribution, what I've seen from the distributors that I've worked with, what's been effective, the positives, the negatives of dealing with distribution, and how much of a part of our business that they actually are. So next week's going to be all about distribution. If you don't know what distributors are, if you're looking for a new one, let me know, because I will give you all kinds of insight when it comes to that. So I've got some episode goals, which I always do. So we're going to try to educate you all about the Gundam franchise in terms of the models, the anime, the card game, and the miniatures game, as far as what we have for information on that specifically. We're going to discuss effective retail strategies that have worked for us for selling Gundam products, and then we're going to have a conversation back and forth and talk to Matt specifically about his background with Gundam, what he's done with the brand, how involved he's been with the store, fundamentally, as far as taking it from something that was like a pretty small section of the wall that we had in the old space, moving into the new space, basically building it out as an entire department sort of by himself. So let's do a brief introduction for Matt. So Matt's worked for me. He was a customer first for a number of years. So I've known Matt for a long time at this point. Card player primarily, came into the store, and then after a period of time, as is the path with a lot of our employees, eventually he dropped off a job application and I said, yeah, let's give it a whirl. And that was, I don't know, Matt, how many years have you been working for me now?
About 8 years.
8 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a pretty good run. So Matt was with us in the old location and transitioned to the new location. Talk about briefly your experience with Gundam, sort of when you got involved with Gundam and what it was about Gundam that sort of attracted you to the license in general.
So, like most people from my generation, I got started in 2000 with Gundam Wing when it was on Toonami. From there, just like I was a kid, so the giant robots were really cool, but it also hit on some more complex themes that were a little bit beyond Pokemon and Dragon Ball that was going on at that point. From there, they started releasing games, they started releasing more of the shows as soon as I could translate stuff. So it just grew and grew and grew, and to the point where I started going on the internet, finding everything I could about it.
Oh, cool. So when was did you start building kits right away, or was it mostly just anime focused?
I started building the kits once they started showing up in Walmart, a few months after like the show had ended.
Yep.
They were a lot smaller kits back then. They were still pretty nice for their time, but I built a lot of them. I had all of them on my wall, and then eventually there was kind of a falling out back then. Less stores started carrying them, and I focused more on just watching the anime.
So you, as far as like anime, Gundam, Gunpla, that sort of thing, you've rode both the wave of it just kind of coming in, sort of the crash that we saw happen, and now, like, you know, COVID, I think, has certainly given a lot more breath as far as like what we're seeing in the market space. I think Witch of Mercury was a pretty big deal on Netflix as far as like kind of stamping down and having something for this generation to really grab onto as far as a show goes.
Yeah, there's been something basically every like 6-7 years that's grown it more and more, and Witch of Mercury really made it take off.
Yeah, I thought that was good. I thought there was like the small YouTube series that they did too that was just sort of the compilation thing where they were building a team and they were carding Gundam fighters in more of like a video game. It almost felt like a MOBA, that particular show. And then recently, what's the one with the video game animation now?
That was Requiem from Vengeance. That was on the Unreal Engine 5.
Yeah, so it was all video game looking stuff. And it was pretty, I don't know, I think it was somewhat controversial because your classic Gundam watcher wanted to see traditional animation, and this was very much not that at all. It was like, I felt like it was like a more massaged version of like watching World of Warcraft or something like that, because that animation style wasn't it for me. So cool. So you've been around or dealing with Gundam for roughly 24 years, 25 years at this point. Yep. Involved in it, built the kits, watched the shows, that sort of stuff. So can you give like a brief overview of what Gundam essentially is at its core for the people out there that might not be familiar with what Gundam is or understand what the franchise is. Just kind of a broad strokes of, the property's 40 years old. It's gone through a bunch of sort of different iterations based on who kind of owned Gundam and that sort of stuff. But what's the general premise of what people are looking at in general when they look at, I'm going to get into Gundam or I'm going to watch one of this series? Is there sort of an overarching theme that each of them has, and how does that sort of work?
Most old giant robot shows, even newer ones, are a lot more fantasy and superfluous. Super robot heroes. These are a little bit more down to earth. It's usually on like younger child soldiers talking about themes of like war is hell. And then from there, it's more just trying to get everyone to grow together. But it's also just got these really cool robots for fighting, for selling. And then they've had a bunch of different alternate universes that have had similar themes. They've had a little bit more ones that have just been focusing on the Gunpla kits themselves even, and there's characters that are building the kits and fighting them.
So Gundam's a little bit over the 40-year history. There's it isn't just one straight timeline, right? So it's a little bit like Marvel and MCU with different Earths and things like that. You've got some Gundam series that sort of take place in the overall big story. Sometimes they're offshoots of this, sometimes they're that. Usually the factions that you see are sort of similar. The robots are a little bit different. That's part of the excitement and enthusiasm for the game. Not dissimilar to anything else. It's a toy brand. Having more new different robots that come out every single show means that you can sell more different robots as well, and characters and merch and that sort of stuff. So it's pretty much that's sort of the ongoing theme. And again, a 40-year-old property is nice because you're talking about 2.5 generations of people, right? So the people that are coming into Gundam now, there's a potential of, a multi-generation sort of brands. We look at those, and like from our stuff, you're talking about multi-generation, you're talking about Barbie, you're talking about Lego, you're talking about G.I. Joe, that sort of stuff from an analog thing. And those all also have TV shows and that sort of thing too. Talk a little bit about Gundam in a more global sense, the scale of its fandom in Japan and globally, and then any kind of expansion that they've had beyond the anime.
So in the beginning, it was actually like pretty weak and did awful, like Star Trek did at the beginning. Then when syndication became a cult hit, became huge over there, had a track path similar to like Star Wars in the US.
Nice.
And then it's just expanded from there. It took a while for it to gain hold in other countries. Gundam Wing, like I mentioned earlier, as well as to really take off in other places. Then later on, mid-2000s, Gundam Seed came out. That was kind of a retelling, and that was like China's first real big push into it as well.
A good amount. It took a little bit of time to percolate for it, but we're seeing it out in other countries. Like we've done really well with it in store and stuff like that. And so why do you think Gundam should potentially matter to other retail viewers that are here listening or looking at, possibly looking at this brand? And I know I've got some distributor reps that are tuning in too, because some distribution people are going to be carrying this product line as well. What do you think the part of the draw and the driver is as a retailer being able to carry this product?
So there's a lot of crossover with other hobbyists. So like there's probably already customers within your Games Workshop and other miniatures games. Players are already building some of these kits. There's a lot of cool customization you can do it. So anyone who likes more for building, who likes stuff to it. And then if you're carrying anime, Gundam's one of the biggest anime out there. So that's a good crossover with that. And then the card game and miniatures game are going to be huge crossovers with it.
Sure. And we sell a handful of the manga as well. So we've got, I think Thunderbolt and Origins are some of the books that we carry that they do from Gundam as well. So that's been good overall. Let's talk about the products and sort of do like a mini showcase as far as what they are. Talk a little bit about the kits themselves and what you'll see in terms of the different grades that are available for the kits and what the differences are sort of between those.
The bulk of the product and bulk of the line are called high grade kits.
Okay.
They're going to come on runners just like GW kits.
What's a runner?
This big giant sprues. They're going to be, sprue. Different word.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of mixture in terminology. You'll see terms just like what Matt did with a runner. For those of us that have built other kits, we think about it in terms of sprues. They call things nippers, and we call those different things. Like there's a bunch of terminology that sort of has its own thing, and he'll probably accidentally or on purpose talk about them specifically because learning some of the vocab for the kits is pretty critical.
The core difference between Gundam kit, a lot of the Gundam kits and everything else is there's no glue. It's all going to be snap fit. They're going to be pre-colored plastic for a lot of them with some nice color separation, especially with the newer ones. There'll be some decals and stickers. Are
they water transfer or are they just regular stick-on? Like how do those work?
There's a mix of both. So they have that. They have dry decals, and then they have the wet transfer ones as well.
And what's the difference between you talked about the grade, so you talked about high grade being most of them. What's the difference between entry grade, high grade, master grade, and perfect grade?
Entry grades are going to require no tools at all.
Oh.
The gates, so like the little tiny parts where the sprues are connected to the runner, are just meant to be pinched off, and then you can just use a little bit of sandpaper, or a lot of times they'll just pinch off perfectly, and they'll all just snap fit together. So they're all pretty easy put together. Great things for getting kids. A lot of the Pokemon ones are like that. High grades, other ones are like 1/4 scale. It's the main thing. A lot of the entry grade Gundam kits are going to be the same size, so there's a lot of extra add-ons. Real grades, same thing, but they will have a lot more realistic look. They'll have more decals to them. They'll have inner frames, so there's more posability. There's more difficulty to it. And then master grades are going to be the larger ones. They're going to have much larger scale. Some of them have extra gimmicks.
You need like an engineering degree to put them together sometimes. Yeah. There's like CAD programs and stuff like that. So what we're getting with the different grades then is number of pieces per kit tends to be a little lower in the entry grade. And as far as putting things together and hobbying things, and the look of it is probably not as complex or as advanced as what we get when we get up to the top level, which is the master grade there. It's a nice way to kind of onboard either newer builders or kids like that. It's sort of like when Lego does Duplo and they have a whole kids section of stuff that's like less pieces and they're a little chunkier and that sort of stuff, and you don't need as many tools. And like I think that the transfers work the same way, right? The lower the grade kit, the more likely it is a sticker, and then they do the water transfers on sort of the higher stuff because it's a little bit harder to model that stuff. Is that correct?
Yeah, and then there's also, you can get the decals separately, so you can go back to your earlier kits and then add them on and make them look cooler.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice. That's a good rundown of the different grades and things like that. And we carry a mixture, but we didn't start out really carrying a mixture, right? Like we didn't jump right into master grade, and I think even early on, I don't think we had much entry grade either. I think we were sort of in the middle, right? We were mostly high grade, we didn't have much perfect grade. We were mostly high grade, and then I think we had some master kits, and that's sort of where we started, right?
Yep.
We look at that line, we decide what we're going to buy and what we're going to purchase and what we're going to get in. The catalog's massive. Like that Excel sheet for ordering is voluminous, right? Like there's a lot of series, there's a lot of different kits, there's a lot of different sizes, there's the same Gundams in like all the grades sometimes, and then you even have the SDs, which is over my shoulder over here. Those are the super deformed, like little chibi style guys and stuff like that. How did we go about putting together sort of an inventory on what we were going to grab the first time? Like what was it that made the decision on what we were going to decide to stock on for inventory?
When we really started getting into it, once we started moving here, that was around when Mr. Mercury was starting. Mm-hmm. So got as much as we could of those because that was the newest, hottest property.
Yeah.
They had made a bunch of changes to kit design to make them a lot cooler with that. And then from there...
Give an example. What's an example of cool kit design thing that they did?
So a lot of high-grade kits will use what's called polycaps that are meant to put the joints together to make them for moving around. These can come loose after a while. So they came up with these new mini inner frame systems that don't use polycaps. So they're a lot sturdier, but they're a little bit more rigid. But overall makes it so they can stand a lot better like this.
So can you change parts out? Is it like something where you can swap weapons and swap armor and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so all the high grade, enter grades, and most of the real grade stuff, they're all uniform design. So you can kit bash anything you want, come up with your own style. A lot of people will just like take parts from a bunch of different things, put their kit together how they want, then take it apart and then airbrush it and start all over and come up with their own design for it.
Oh, so just whatever you want. Grab this from this robot, that from another robot, and make your own robot and call it a day. Let's talk about, really briefly, tools and accessories. What sort of tools, what sort of accessories have we found ourselves? Now we got the kits in and stuff like that. We also need the stuff to build. How much of the stuff that we had outside of what we had for miniatures here at the store already do we need to get on top of that? Or what things in that sort of space were add-ons that we didn't necessarily have on our generic paint rack or that sort of thing?
Cutters we obviously already had because of GW and whatnot.
Sure.
A lot of things we added on were Gundam marker pens, make it a little bit easier for painting. It's actually got to the point where we've brought in more lines of those, and a lot of the GW players are using some of those too for doing some details on smaller things.
Yeah, it was something that I was sort of surprised with. I'm like, I'm just so accustomed to people painting with paintbrushes and pots of paint and stuff like that. I saw the marker pens. I was like, nobody's actually going to use those things, right? And then we brought them in, and it was like, yes, they are. They're going to use those, and then other people are using them with other lines as well. We get some stuff in. It's sort of happening. We're selling some stuff. We're making some buys. We're grabbing this. We're grabbing that. We're dealing with some allocation, that sort of stuff. What sort of techniques where we use an inside of the retail store to sort of help grow our community, help grow our base as far as Gunpla went?
So first off, I know a lot of our miniatures players, communicate with that group. So just talking with them as they came in through the store, found additional players from there. They gave me more information that even I didn't know at the time to help grow the community, and that got more of them in. Also doing some display stands, help get people in. And then we also, the biggest thing was we started doing Gundam build days.
Yes.
We did a bunch of advertisement for the first few of them. It attracted a lot of people, got people interested in. We also put them on the same days as other large-scale events we had going on.
Yep.
So like we had it during our big giant board game day that we do once every 2 months, and there was a lot of people that came over from that.
Yeah, a bunch of board gamers got done playing board games and they decided to build a kit.
Yeah.
Like one of the things that I liked a lot about the first couple of build days that we did was just the diversity of people that are building Gundam, right? We had young kids, we had women, we had dads, we had moms, we had the whole, like it was a whole swath of people that were in building stuff. Like the pictures from that event were just absolutely crazy. So there's no age limit really, so you can do whatever you want. The margins are pretty good, much better than Lego and that sort of thing. So let's briefly touch on card game and miniature game. Let's talk about the card game first. So Bandai's releasing another card game. It feels like they do this like every 6 months, right? Where we've been pounded with Bandai card games. There's a Bandai card game coming, you know, every 6 months it feels like a new card game's coming out and stuff like that. And like to the point where like we started sighing a little bit. But the thing about the Bandai card games is what I've seen is a lot of times if you're a Bandai card game player, typically the foundation of the game is something that's familiar to you, whether it's the resource system, the way the attacking works, whether it's the way that you take damage, that sort of stuff. So Bandai's done a really good job of sort of taking some core components of things, building a game out of that, and then giving each of them sort of different tweaks in different ways, whether it's, you know, the damage you take comes off the board and you draw those cards or you don't draw those cards and stuff like that. So talk briefly about the card game and what we can expect to see from that versus the other Bandai stuff that's on the market.
So the biggest thing about this one that's different is they have multiplayer rules built in right from the get-go. Every single other game that they've come out with has either had rules that didn't really work for multiplayer or just none at all. Okay. So that's going to allow like a lot of the more casual players that just want to play, get groups together. They've used a lot of mechanics, like the best mechanics from all the things through there. They have side deck, that they have a kind of a threshold system for playing stuff, and they put in other mechanics to help slow down the aggressiveness of some of the other games, and make it so you can actually spend more time with the game.
That was one of the things that I noticed too watching some of the demo games. Like there's a little bit more time for development. You get into the game a little bit longer with the different shields and bases that they have and things like that. You know, as far as product SKUs go, it's a standard Bandai release, right? So we're gonna get starters, we're gonna get boosters. They're gonna have some sleeves, some deck boxes. It looks like they had some counters, but then they have this other weird product that's a Gundam Assemble product. What is the Gundam Assemble starter sort of all about?
So they're going to be enhanced starters that are going to help to preview their actual miniatures game that's going to come out at a future date.
Okay.
Each one of them is going to come with 3 miniatures. They're going to be smaller than the regular normal kits. They're going to be about 2 inches tall.
Okay.
They're going to be on simple runners, snap fit, just like the other stuff. Key difference is they're unpainted. They'll be used for the game just to show off the kits, and to be used for tokens for stuff in the game. So it's a nice little cross promotion. So you can like show off and use these as tokens and then have something ready to go for when the actual miniatures game comes out.
Yeah, and we haven't seen a ton of information about the miniatures thus far, but looking at top down, like I think the miniatures that they featured in their promo, their sizzle reel there, were the miniatures that we're going to see in some of those starters as well. So if you're looking at this from a retail ordering perspective, we were sort of talking the other day about deciding what our numbers are going to be. There's a good chunk of people that are probably going to buy it. Every Bandai game is you need to buy 2 starters if you're going to play that faction because there's exclusive starter cards that are relevant in the game for a period of time. In this case, we're looking at a lot of people are probably going to buy one of the combo starters and one of the regular starters so that they get one set of the miniatures and then they get one set of the starters as well. So when we're looking at ordering for that, I think we're going to have the customer base that we're going to have is we're going to have some people that are Bandai card players that maybe don't care about Gundam at all that are going to come in and they're going to play that game because it's a Bandai card game. It's new. It's different. They'll let them start at the floor to begin with. Then you're going to have Gundam players that also enjoy card games that build kits and stuff like that know their property. Then you're going to have a handful of people that build Gundam kits that also play other miniatures games that are going to want to play the miniature game as well. And this gives them an early opportunity to be able to get some of that stuff. So I think it's a pretty wide swath of different fandoms coming from different areas sort of being able to attract themselves to this game. Not to say that Gundam has never had a another game out there. There's a bunch of different mobile games and stuff like that. So card game looks good. Kind of the greatest hits of what we've seen from all the other Bandai card games, sort of in this stew mixed together to do this thing. Not overly complex. Again, onboarding should be a piece of cake. It's a Bandai card game, so it's, you know, it's thoughtful, it's well developed, and it's got good design work to it, but it's not something that's going to be too aggressive or overbearing for somebody to try to learn it without any real card game experience at all. And there's enough in there for it to be somebody's primary card game as well. And based on the information that they have as far as the collector pieces and the collector cards in there, it looks like it's going to have good collector value as well. So they've mixed in a bunch of stuff similar to some of the cards are just completely beautiful. And one of the things too that's sort of a nuance that some people won't think about necessarily is that it's international and domestic launch is the same. We're not behind sets like we've been with other games and stuff like that. We'll be developing our meta side by side with Japan on this one, so it's going to be nice from that perspective. What excites you the most about the Gundam card game, Matt?
For me, from the collector's end, the alt arts, they're gorgeous. The ones
just beautiful.
We've seen just a few.
Yeah.
Multiplayer is going to be a big deal for me because I have a lot of friends that they don't have a time to come to the tournaments. Their schedules don't line up.
Yeah.
There's multiple ones I want to play. I'm always have like 3 or 5 people together, so this will be perfect.
Yeah, that'll be nice to be able to. And if you're the person that's going to provide the decks and stuff like that, it means that there's no real cost to them to kind of bring in. But it also allows us, you know, sort of 2 different formats for tournaments, which, you know, outside of Limited, we don't really have that with any other Bandai game. So it'll be neat to have the opportunity to be able to do a multiplayer format tournament, which is kind of cool because there isn't really a game out there that's doing that in any real way. Altered sort of did it, and it was okay, and Twin Suns has been okay from SWU, but not anything that's been a real focus. So we'll see what happens as far as that goes. It's nice to have that available. So we talked about retailing. We talked about sort of the way that we handled building the community and stuff like that. So I want to get into the last sort of segment that I'm going to cover today is just my predictions and sort of my caution. So I'm kind of going to give you the sobering angle of how I feel about Gundam in general and that sort of thing. So the first thing is anybody that's decided to get into Gundam and that's going on their first thing through there and they haven't really studied any of the Gundam stuff, and you look at that catalog, the catalog is an intimidating look. It's just a bunch of letters and numbers. You don't necessarily know what's going to be popular and what's not going to be popular. So, you know, we had the benefit of, you know, I'm a lunatic and deep dive stuff pretty heavy when I'm going to get into stuff. I spent a bunch of time sort of learning the line and getting into it, and Matt already had a bunch of time and experience in the line. So that level of expertise was sort of already baked in for us. So not to say that Matt or myself or anybody's ordered perfectly. We've certainly had stuff that we've had to discount because it didn't sell for a period of time. But not having somebody with some level of expertise there is going to make things challenging. You're going to have a hard time. You're going to struggle with that. And one of the cautions that I would have is if you go out and you look at an influencer and they're reviewing kits and things like that, you have to sort of take that a little bit with a grain of salt, because there are influencers out there that are pro builders that are going to have things to say about the pro build stuff that's really, really good, and it's super topical and it's super relevant. But any of us that own a game store know that most of the people are sort of hobbyists or enthusiasts and in between and aren't necessarily the pro builders, which is the reason why we sell so much more of the middling kits than we do the kits on the ends. So focusing your attention on some of that middle grade stuff makes a lot of sense. The other thing too is Matt said we really leaned into it when we moved into the new space. Well, the new space was 2.5 times the size of the old space. Before, we did not have nearly the wall space, and you know, hopefully my wonderful editor and producer Brian will cut in some pictures of exactly what we're talking about throughout this video to show you how much space we have dedicated to this thing. It is a space hog. These are some kits behind us that we have and how much space they take up and that sort of thing. We dedicate a ton of floor space to it. Now, it's earned floor space, right? Because we wouldn't put more stuff in if we didn't have the sales there. We would put something else there instead, or, you know, Plush would end up gobbling that stuff up. Just as a caution, it is a space hog, and I'm sure there's plenty of retailers out there that are looking at their Funko Pop section that's dilapidated at this point. The Plush section is falling off, and you're like, oh, I've got a couple of empty shelves here. I can just jam some of these kits in here and just haplessly put it on the shelf. You sort of have to pack a lunch with it. It's not an easy line to try to sell. We found that the restocks are unreliable. Is that a nice way of saying it, Matt?
Especially anything that's super popular. You don't get enough on the first run. You'll see it in maybe 3-4 months.
You see it in maybe 3 or 4 months, or maybe not at all, or it takes a long time. The same thing happens, and it's happened with us as well. We've dealt with allocations on stuff. We've been told we were going to get things at a certain date, and the thing actually didn't show up. So it was a little bit further along than what we thought we were going to see. Even with the number of distributors and sub distributors that are coming online with this stuff. So Alliance has already got 900 SKUs, give or take, on their site. I know PhD is moving in, and they're going to be bringing the line in too in the next couple of weeks here. They were at the big Gundam thing in Orlando that was a couple of weeks ago with influencers and stuff. They're super excited about that. They'll be carrying the card game. So right now it's Alliance, GTS, and PhD that are going to be carrying the card game, which is the miniatures game as well. I don't know if GTS is carrying the kits or if they carry the kits now. Somebody feel free to comment in the comment section if you know, but I haven't looked for them specifically there. But I know in the topic, in the conversation with retailers a week or so ago that were talking about getting into Gundam and bringing Gundam in, there was like 10 different sub-distributors that they listed, which are people that we don't use for supply at all. There should be a little bit of concern about commoditization based on the saturation. So there's a whole bunch of retailers that are going to come in. We're going to grab onto this stuff. They're going to try to start selling these kits. There's a bunch of distributors that are going to start doing that too. So like some of the profit that's there and that's available might not necessarily be there. It might not translate to your market specifically. The other thing too is, while Bandai is sort of got these distributors on making this landfall with this and pushing the game more and pushing the kits themselves more, as American society, we don't have any sort of cultural moment in media that's happening right now. Like Matt and I talked about Witch of Mercury, which was super popular. I think it was probably the biggest zap that Gundam has had for us since...
Definitely for getting new people in, for sure.
Yeah, and part of it is the main character was a girl, and she had this just insane Gundam. It's a really good show. If you haven't watched that show and you're looking to get into Gundam, I would say start there. It's super, super palpable. It sort of follows the same sort of series that you'll see in any of the other ones.
It's on YouTube for free, too.
And it's on YouTube for free, so that's pretty good. So another caution is there isn't a big movie or a live action or something else that's happening right now that's in the zeitgeist of our culture that's saying, oh, everybody run to Gundam. So we can put these boxes on the shelf and we can kind of do a thing, but it isn't necessarily going to mean that it's going to catch on any more than it already has, right? We saw, the bottom of manga and anime sort of fell out in the early 2000s, and then we had there's been a nice resurgence for it and things like that, and we started picking up more of that stuff during COVID. But just because it's sold into it doesn't mean that it's going to be a thing. So it's going to work for some stores and it's going to work for other stores. At this point, with the TCG coming out and the miniatures game coming out, it's something that you can dabble with, and maybe you can ride the hype for what that is and stuff, but without somebody that's on staff that's dedicated, that has a level of expertise for it, I think it's a really, really hard line to manage. I mean, you spend a good chunk of your time, Matt, looking at sales sheets, looking at the reorder stuff, working with other distributors that were picking up kits and stuff, merchandising, labeling things, putting events together. So we didn't approach it as sort of this side line of product. We as it started to sell and it started to grow, we started to expand based on what those sales were, and we were successful doing it. But if Matt didn't have the level of expertise that he has to be able to sort of steer that ship, and it was just us shooting in the dark, it would be much harder to do. So I would be cautious about that. So that's going to be our show for today. Matt, thanks so much for coming in and filling in the blanks for me. You've been the captain of that ship the entire time. I haven't had to do anything other than, some oversight and look at some stuff for sales and that sort of thing. It's definitely turned into a profit center, and that's due to the hard work and the expertise that you have in there. So that's pretty awesome. So thanks so much for that. Next week, as I said, we're going to be talking all about distributors and distribution, the good, bad, the ugly when it comes to that. Other than that, everybody have a great rest of your week and happy gaming. Thanks.